So we're going to start on the porting, the hand porting of the 4G63 head. So the part that we're going to look at first. So here's our head. We have the guides removed. Valve guides are gone. Okay, so if we look down in there, no guides. Those have been pressed out. So now what we're going to be working on first is where the valve seat transitions to the actual back of the valve, the tunnel that hits the back of the valve. From the factory, there's some machining that goes on, and those holes are cut. So what you have is you have a transition from where the seat is and where the valve holes are cut into the casting. Now, what remains a lot of the time is a very big ridge. Okay, so what we want to do is get in there and eliminate it, but we don't want to affect the seat. So you have to be very sure where your valve seat ends. So a lot of people who do this sort of stuff suggest putting a little bit of machinist dye on there, putting the valve in there, and just delicately moving it like you're going to be lapping that valve. And then you could see where the sealing surface is, and that's what you want to avoid. So that angled part right on the edge, that's going to be where it seats. But if you're unsure, that's where you would do things like I just described. So you want to remove that ridge that's obviously in there. And you can do that on the exhaust and the intake side. And you can sort of polish down into the channel. Now, keep in mind that on the intake side, you don't want a mirror finish. On the exhaust side, you can do a mirror finish, right? You want to encourage a little bit of turbulence still on the intake side for proper fuel atomization. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get in there with a die grinder, and then I'm going to finish it with some sanding cones. These are the sanding cones. You could buy these off of Amazon. There's also they're available at speed shops. So that's the first step, is getting behind those valves where the valve seats and blending it into the channel. So let's get that done. Okay, so the head, the exhaust side's done. I'm not a professional head porter. I've done probably a dozen heads ever. And I just follow a few really simple sort of ideas on, that's the universal for all heads. The short side of the valve needs to be cleaned up. Any casting marks don't necessarily match to the gasket, because the gasket could be anything. You know, blend everything. Yeah, things like that. Obviously you want everything to be equal from port to port. So taking a look here, there's chips everywhere. Obviously I'm going to clean this before it goes together, but okay, so it's a bit hard to see, but basically the short side, which is at the bottom leading to the valves, the important part. I don't knife edge the divider because I don't like the idea that when this heats up that, you know, a chip could actually come off of there. And so I don't do that. Yeah, so port to port, you know, everything is mostly equal. The top of the roof where the guides come through, I flattened that out a bit because there's just a ton of material there. And blend everything back into just below the valve seats. Now this is 6 hours by hand. You know, it's free, right? Like CNC, sending this to a machine shop, you know, a head would be like $2 to $3 grand, right? So why spend the money? You can definitely do this at home. Now, is it going to be as good as a CNC job or, you know, a machine shop where they have a flow bench? Yeah, of course not. But it's also not going to be thousands of dollars, right? So behind the valves, those are all cleaned up. I pulled the guides so that I don't have to run into the guide with a carbide bit or anything like that. You know, being very cautious not to take a chunk out of the valve seat. Yeah. So this is on the exhaust side. There's a lot of material you can remove on the exhaust side, but you don't want to go too crazy. You don't want to end up into a water jacket. So yeah, so that's the exhaust side. Tomorrow I'm going to start on the intake side. The intake side you want to leave a little bit more rough. You don't want it as smooth, because keep in mind that there has to be a little bit of turbulence on the intake side so that there's proper fuel atomization. Now it's the same thing, so concentrate on this side here, right where my finger's going. Okay, the upper side, the short side of the valve, remove all those ridges all the way around. It's all smooth all the way around. Okay, you can see here, it's just a giant ridge there. It's gonna have to be removed. Look at that. That's huge. So get rid of that, right? These are castings. They can be very rough. It's very easy to clean these up and get some gains. So tomorrow I'm going to be doing the intake side. I'll be matching it to somewhat to my skunk intake that's covered in aluminum chips. The skunk 2 intake, I've already hand ported one side, smoothed it out because there was quite a ridge on the intake side. So I'm going to be matching that up to the head and then just blending it back, getting rid of all that casting flash behind the valves. And then after that's done, the head's going to be heading back to the machine shop to get the +1 millimeter valves put in and all the GSC valve springs and all the high-speed valve train stuff that I bought. So all right, so we'll get on the intake side tomorrow, and I'll show you guys what I do with that. Okay, so here's the very simple stuff that I use. First, I use a carbide that's a spiral. This is for aluminum. I have kind of two sizes in this. There's a small one and a really big one that I use. There's also one that I have with a long stem on it, so I can get some reach out of it. This is like your workhorse. This is what removes a ton of material. Now for the short side, especially by the valves, I use a carbide ball. Now I know this tooth design is for steel, but this is just for very, very small areas. So I don't use this to remove a whole bunch of material. I just use it to do areas that are really hard to get to. So I find this really useful. Okay, then I jump to around 100 grit cone. And this is to smooth out the stuff from the carbide. Okay, and then I jump to an 80 grit, like it's kind of a foam abrasive. These you can get off Amazon for cheap. So they are, you can get a bag for like, I don't know, $20, like of 200 of these. These I find really good. So these are about 80 to 100 grit. And then they sell these like foam little balls in different grits all the way up to 400. So if you want to do some polishing, you can just go gradually up with these and smooth it right out. So yeah, so just these 4 items. You'll need a Dremel tool for this small guy here, and then these 3 are on a die grinder with well, obviously using air. So all right, so those are the abrasives that I use for head porting. So we're working on the intake side of the head this morning, and yeah, it's going fairly well. Now on the intake side, there was a lot of cleanup needed behind the valves. So I've roughed that in now, and I've started blending down to the actual runners. And so let's take a quick look. Okay, so on this one, I've just started doing the sides, and the head's upside down, so the floor is here. So I haven't done the floor on this one. I've done a few of them already. Now on the intake side, doesn't need to be opened up very much. Yeah, it was very, very slight to match up with the Skunk 2 intake. And most of it was just taking away the casting flash that was on the inside and making it consistent. So going up to the valves, I've just started on them. And the goal again was smoothing out the short side runner, like right here, and getting rid of all of that big ridge that occurs behind the valve from casting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it a bit rough again to promote a little bit of turbulence for fuel atomization. So if you look here, this is as smooth as it's going to get. It's not going to be like the exhaust side, which is more like a mirror finish almost. So yeah, so that's where we're at. Continue on, move to the floor here and clean everything up. All right, guys, I've wrapped up the head, finished all the hand porting. Now I'm going to be getting it ready to go back to the machine shop for some assembly. I'll just go over some of the parts that I'm going to be using. So intake side's done. On the intake side, I paid special attention to again that short side here. On the 4G63 head, there's a lot of junk there. Big lumps from casting, that sort of stuff. So intake side's done. Exhaust side I already finished. It turned out good. Okay, so now what I'm going to get the machine shop to do is cut the valve seats for the +1 millimeter valves, or lap them in, whatever they have to do. I got to get them to make sure that after putting in the 1 millimeter valves, that the valve stem height is correct. So the end of the valve might need to be ground, but I don't think so necessarily, but we'll see. So for a head build, just so you guys understand why these can get pretty expensive, and why I hand ported all this to save some money, because what we got here, you have to buy 16 valves, +1 millimeter over, or stock size. Stock size will take you to really far into the horsepower range, but I opted for +1 mil over. Okay, so you got to buy valves, got to buy valve springs. Okay, you got to buy retainers Okay, these are for the top of the springs. You gotta buy the locks. Okay, or keepers, whatever you want to call them. Okay, valve seals, guides, and the seats that go at the base of the spring. I'm just going to be reusing the stalkers. They're in good shape. And so, just for a 16 valve engine, math just isn't on your side, right? Because, everything is times 16. So for these dual overhead cam engines, that can add up quite quickly. So this is why, rather than buying a head or getting a shop to do a CNC port, I just did that myself to save some money. Like I said, I'm not going to claim that this is going to flow the same as if a shop would have done it, but there's still going to be a gain. Like I said, I've done maybe a dozen heads and dynoed a whole bunch of them, and I've always gotten gains off of them. So don't be afraid to do your own stuff. You'll especially learn a lot. Now, the other thing with head porting, you gotta sort of hold yourself back from removing too much material, and also, critique yourself about that. Be aware of that while you're doing it. The other thing is you could literally polish and take out little nicks and little bits of casting flash forever. You got to eventually cut it off and say, okay, I'm done, right? And just move on with the project. So for this head, I would say I'm probably into it maybe 8 hours of porting. And that's, I mean, that's not a whole bunch of time going into a head. Doing all of these radiuses inside, all the passageways and tapering and polishing everything up, that takes a lot of time. And again, there's 16 holes there, so it's a lot of work. So yeah, so next step, back to the machine shop, drop it off, probably get a decent bill for that, because that's going to take some time. Again, 16 valves, putting those all together, putting the guides in, honing the guides, oversized valves, cutting the seats, seals, springs, everything. It's gonna take some time. So I expect I'll be paying a little bit of money for that, but that's not a big deal. That's how it goes. And so we're gonna get this wrapped up and move on, hopefully in the next little bit, to some engine assembly. All right, guys, so the head is back from the machine shop. All the valve train is in, everything's been assembled, all the GSC bits are in, new valve springs. The head was cut for bigger valves. They actually did a coil bind test as well. So I supplied them with the cam card for the R2 billet cams, and based on that info, they did a coil bind test. I just wanted to make sure, even though I did buy this as a set, I think it's important to sort of make absolutely sure. So so the springs did not bind, and so yeah, all the new stuff is in there. New valves are in, everything's oversized, 1 mil over. Turned out really nice. New guides are in as well. Okay, so the head is pretty much ready to go. All right, so I am very happy with the head build thus far. So Next step is to get the cams in and get the head onto the 2.2 liter Tomei block, and yeah, and move forward from there. So I'm going to continue with this engine build, piecing it together, so definitely stay tuned on my channel. And as per usual, if you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit that bell so that you can get updates every time I put up a new video. And as per usual, come check me out on Instagram as well at Wrench Rampage. Stay tuned for more 2.2 Tomei build. Have a good night.